In Broward County last year, we had over 500 fatal overdose deaths, and we had in the last few years between Miami-Dade County and Broward County, 3,000 overdoses.
2022, amongst 555 people in Broward County whose death was a result of fentanyl, 509 overdose deaths were with fentanyl in combination with other drugs.
There's an old saying that if you want to know where your priorities are, look at where you spend your money. In 2017, there were over 47,000 deaths from opioid overdose alone. In that year, it's estimated that we spent, as a nation, about $3.5 billion treating this condition. That same year, we spent nearly 4 to 5 times that amount in criminal justice approaches to it.
The overview of the costs is really about looking at the balance of the allocation of funds to the preventable side of an overdose situation. We spend a lot of money on the reactive side.
Like, I didn't think every shift we'd be running at least one overdose or multiple ones.
It's become such a problem. We're not really tackling the problem. It's just kind of brushed under the rug, but there's no specific answer for it.
Yeah, I've already invited 30 people. Amazing.
Heather, take one.
My name is Heather Palacios. I'm the founder of Wonderful Incorporated. Chris is my little brother. Chris is the male version of me. He's very gregarious, outgoing, could walk into any atmosphere and morph into the temperature of that atmosphere without skipping a beat. He was also a phenomenal soccer player and would have gone very far had he not gotten involved with drugs. My family were at their wits' end at one point and enrolled him in a drug rehabilitation program for teenagers in downtown Chicago, and finally had to draw that boundary line that if you leave, you can't come home. Par for the course, Chris went to the rehabilitation program, but left. And it was in the middle of winter in Chicago, and he couldn't go home. So he was on the streets for the first time. A gentleman approached him and offered food and shelter, and Chris took him up on it. The guy ended up holding him at knife point and raping him. When it came to prosecute this gentleman for what he had done, Chris couldn't relive it, so he and my family dropped charges. Yeah. My parents finally relented and finally let him move back home at one point, but the final straw with letting him be in my parents' home was just a bad trip that caused him to want to take his life because he was in such a state of manic psychosis on this trip and wanting to die. He ended up taking a knife and cutting himself so intensely, so fiercely that the blood was everywhere and he was smearing it all over the walls in my parents' home. He went nuts and he took all the dishes out of the cabinets and broke them on the floors, and then he passed out to die, face down in the living room. My mom came home from work and I had to fly back home. And then Chris was sent to South Florida, to his first sober living home down here with me. That was 10 years ago.
We'll see more kind of issues once, twice a month if a bad batch comes in.
Sometimes seeing the saddest thing, seeing how the family is like hysterical, seeing their loved ones suffering through this.
So currently, right now, we have a disease. Addiction, including opioid addiction that causes these overdoses, is a disease. But we are treating it as if it is a criminal justice issue. And how do I know that? Because we look at where you're spending the money.
If we had the opportunity for prevention, or if we had the opportunity to move these clients and patients into treatment, and those dollars were spent on providing them treatment, those dollars go so far in treatment as opposed to the emergency response dollars, which are, very high.
The average cost of an autopsy of an overdose is about $5,000. Prevention services could use that $5,000, or that $5,000 could have gone to someone who's in recovery.
We're spending relatively small amount of money on actually treating it, which is what you do if you're dealing with a disease, and we're spending multiple billions more incarcerating incarcerating it and treating it as a criminal problem.
All of Chris's life, Chris and I have been in this relay race, passing the baton back and forth. And it's a race for life. Chris and I have both struggled with suicide for a long time. And the only difference is I didn't have addiction to compound that battle and make it harder and worse. And I know we both want to make it to the finish line. And so for years, we were passing the baton back and forth because when one of us was weak with wanting to give up, the other one was strong. October 2022, normal day. I get a call from the chaplain that was very close to Chris. I saw that he was calling my phone. I thought it was somebody else probably had died and we were gonna do the funeral together. And he said, "Hey, Heather, it's Stevie B. Is your husband with you?" That's what I do. I knew it. I dropped the phone and I fell on the floor. I screamed and wailed for 2 hours. I couldn't believe that much pain could come out of me. I didn't even know I had that much pain within me.
Our first community is always the family. When somebody has an addiction, just like when they have any other chronic illness, it impacts not only that person, but it impacts the family. And when someone dies from addiction, that's not just their story. That's the story of their children, of their parents, of their brothers, of their cousins, of the people that they worked with. And so opioid overdose affects the community first by affecting the family.
But 48 million Americans are suffering from a substance use disorder of some type or form. It could be mild, it could be moderate, it could be severe. If that's not a public health emergency, I'm not sure what is.
I mean, I'm not an expert, but I am an unsatisfied customer. And I do wish the one thing we all would do is not only see them as humans that have intrinsic value, but put the atmospheres around them that say you are a dignified, valuable human being. And I juxtapose a lot of the atmospheres that Chris was in down here to, other ones that I have gone to speak to or visit. I know that it's possible. I know we could dignify the atmospheres that they're trying to recover in without billions of dollars.
The amount of taxing, that it's been for not only the city and firemen all over the country, but of course, patients and family in hospitals and addiction centers. I mean, it's just astronomical.
And it definitely doesn't discriminate against any certain person.
Stigma is a negative prejudgment about a person, a group of people, or a condition. When we have a negative perspective, our tendency is to not want to invest in them. Our political structures are largely driven by public perception. If we tend to have a negative view of a group of people, our politicians are disincentivized from investing in or opening up or encouraging research in a specific area.
Because it is a disability, it's a disability recognized by the ADA. It affects the chemistry of the brain.
Stigma literally locks the door on helping people who are struggling. And the only way to change that is for every one of us as individuals, as a community, as a nation, to challenge our stigma, to challenge our tendency to look negatively on any person or group.
You know, I understand that people struggling with substance abuse are a handful. I know firsthand. I know. I have no doubt aged 20 years, and that's why I have to get Botox regularly now.
So if we can get on the front end and do some good prevention work and great resources to the treatment side, then I think we'd have a better balance. We would have better outcomes ultimately for those that are suffering from substance use disorders.
Having grace and mercy for each other is how we can change our world. The reality is that untreated addiction is a terminal illness. They will either move to recovery or they will move towards early death.
It's not an easy section of society to help, but they're human, and they're not any less of a human than we are. Chris didn't get less value as a human being than I did because he struggled with addiction. Now, it's learning to run a race alone. I don't have that person to pass the baton to. That baton partner is gone. But that's the best way to describe our relationship, was running for our lives, but wanting to win and passing that baton back and forth when the other one was weak.